morning, everyone. It's working. Yeah. I am super happy to be here with this panel as a developer by training and then a product person by choice. Web3 development and infrastructure is a topic that's super close to my heart, so I'm excited to be talking about a great roster that we have here in terms of service providers in the Web3 infrastructure space. So guys, why don't we start with a few quick intros, if you can talk about yourselves and what you're currently focusing on. Taimur, what did you start?
Yeah, thank you for having me here today. My name is Taimur Farman-Farmian. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Slide. Before Slide, I was on the product team at Coinbase, focused on simplifying crypto experiences for everyday users. I've been involved with crypto since 2015 and have also held a number of roles, product and strategy at Instacart and others. In the last few years, have been very focused on simplifying Web3 experiences for everyday users. It's where what drew me to Coinbase and what inevitably had me leave to go and start Slide. And at Slide, we're focused on making Web3 effortless for dApps and everyday users. We want to enable every dApp to be able to serve an effortless experience, so any user can show up and not have any context on crypto and enjoy an experience with any dApp that's as seamless as that of Web2.
Sweet. I'll go next.
Yeah.
I'm Itai, co-founder, CEO of Dynamic. I do not have as much crypto experience, actually. That's pretty cool. I bought my first Bitcoin 10 years ago, so I've been hooked since then, but I've switched to the crypto side a couple years, or I guess 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. What we do at Dynamic is pretty straightforward. We're trying to build Auth0 for wallet-based authentication. Our premise is that everyone will have a wallet in their pocket in a couple of years. It's this pretty magical experience. The first time you connect with a wallet to a Magic Eden or an OpenSea, and everything kind of just shows up. And so we want to make it very easy for developers to kind of implement all wallets across all chains, everything that has to do with the authentication experience, the onboarding, the authorization experience, with a couple lines of code, with the idea that instead of logging in with Facebook or logging in with your email, over time you'll just log in with your wallet, not just to Web3 websites, but Web2 as well. So that's what we do. We have a shameless plug. We have a booth outside, so if you want to talk to me, I'm there.
Yeah, great. I'm Ahmed Abbasi, co-founder CEO here at Syndica. We primarily provide Solana RPC infrastructure and developer tools. My first experience with crypto was probably also around 10 years ago when I bought my first Bitcoin and then sold it the next year, and then bought it again and then sold it again, over and over again, rinse and repeat. So Coinbase has benefited a lot from my trading activity. But yeah, what we are trying to do essentially is make it super easy for developers to build really scalable dApps in the Solana ecosystem. So we primarily are providing really scalable RPC infrastructure, and then we also have some really great APIs that make it easy to build any kind of user experience that you're trying to build in the Solana ecosystem. So that's kind of what we do. We also have a booth. Please swing by and say hi to our team.
Cool, thank you. I'm Jordan. I'm the COO at Cyberva. I've got about 16 years in cybersecurity, based out of Taiwan. Built solutions that in the past are being used, today by 9 of the top 10 US banks and 56 of the Fortune 100. So my first exposure to crypto was actually tracking ransomware groups and using Bitcoin addresses to actually try to do attribution and figure out who they were. So I got exposed on the bad side of things first, I guess. But you did some work building exchanges after that in the crypto space. I'm an economist by training, so all of the sort of game theoretical stuff around crypto was really what kind of pulled me in. Cyberva, we're essentially a cybersecurity team, but we've built what we call a digital asset management platform that really starts from how do you effectively manage the private keys? And answer, I guess, one of the biggest problems in this space is how do we separate the rights to use the private keys from the responsibility of keeping them secure? Because I think this is something that institutions, and especially traditional institutions getting into the space, they really struggle with. Your finance teams, your executives and so on, they don't know how to deal with this stuff. So they will get hacked, they will get phished, they will get scammed, they will lose the private keys. And so then that's really our core, and on top of that, we've built a suite of tools that really help organizations scale up their digital asset operations Everything from compliance to running managed nodes infrastructure to really having a full suite of APIs to help you kind of do anything that you want as a very large institution servicing hundreds of thousands or millions of customers.
Cool, and that's a great segue because one of the things that I think, I'm not, to be honest, I'm not a fan of the Web3 theme or nomenclature. I think it's a bit confusing. It became a bag for a lot of things. But when we talk from your own perspective, because you guys are all taking a specific point of view to this problem, right? From your own individual business's perspective, when you talk about Web3 infrastructure, what are we talking about? What are the concerns that, for a business or for a developer that you guys have as a customer that you're particularly focusing on? Tim, if you want to start.
Yeah, so of course, I think infrastructural needs are pretty broad and far-ranging, and depending on what you're building, of course, you'll have probably different needs. Within the context of Slide, we're focused on what I would kind of generally call user experience infrastructure. So the components of one stack, the kind of the user stack of sorts that enables applications to be used by their end users. So what this looks like is the ability for basically fiat rails and the fiat to crypto rails or fiat to NFT rails, custody, so the ability to instantiate wallets with email address or social login, or basically very, very easily be able to spin up custody within the context of an application, cross-chain infrastructure and what we call relay infrastructure to enable for gasless transactions, make sure transactions are never dropped. These are some of the infrastructural components that we look at Slide that we offer to developers. And yeah, so maybe that gives a little context.
Yeah. How about you, Itay? What kind of perspective you guys have?
Yeah, so we think, the way we think about Web3 is, I think for the first time you're essentially, so let's have a step back. One of the most successful kind of open protocols out there is email, right? And it's de facto a decentralized kind of thing where everyone can build on top of it. Web3 for the first time kind of creates these kind of public good rails for pretty much everything else, whether it's payments or things like USDC, whether it's identity or anything of that sort. And so the way I think about Web3 and the way Dynamic thinks about Web3 is how do we kind of lower the bar for individuals or kind of developers to interact with these decentralized rails or to interact with these public good rails, right, in a scalable way. So rather than having identity live within kind of a closed Twitter as a company ecosystem, how can you bring kind of information from a Lens protocol or a Farcast or anything of that sort and kind of let developers interact with it and build on top of it, right? So that's how we think about Web3 Rails. Specifically, it touches on wallets, which is inherently all wallets live on these shared rails, right? Which means that you can easily, you don't like wallet A, you can easily move to wallet B and so on. But for developers, it's pretty much a nightmare to kind of handle all of these. And so what we're thinking about is how do we create this abstraction layer on top of these kind of shared rails that are being spun up, and there's this massive competition. How do we kind of abstract that away for developers so that they don't have to think about it? So that's kind of the lens we're looking at.
Aman, what about you?
Yeah, I guess like from our perspective, the biggest thing that we're trying to improve is the developer experience. So today, when I think about building a product in Web 2, I automatically reach for AWS or GCP. And what we're trying to build is the cloud of Web 3 and make it really accessible for anybody to build any type of application. So what that really means is there's a lot of plumbing that needs to get done in Web 3. And the plumbing requires scalable infrastructure. In the case of Solana, it's the world's most scalable blockchain today, proven most scalable blockchain today. I know there's a lot of blockchains out there that tout 100,000 TPS, but none have actually proved it. But on average, you see 4,000 to 5,000 transactions per second on Solana. And so if you're building some kind of application that needs to ingest that much data and then actually act upon it, you need a reliable source of data through a stream. So like, for instance, we have a Blockstream API, which allows you to stream directly from the validator any kind of transaction data, any kind of block data that is occurring on the validator in real time. And then you can act upon it however you want. So the way we think about things is how do we provide developers the building blocks to build out whatever application they need. We take a less of an opinionated approach to the infrastructure. So we're not building NFT APIs, we're not building protocol-specific APIs. but we'll provide the building blocks for somebody to build their own custom API from kind of the building blocks that we provide. So
More general purpose in nature.
yeah, exactly.
How about you, Jordan? What kind of point of view perspective you guys have when it comes to this idea of Web3 infrastructure?
Sure. So the first thing is, let me qualify whatever I say is that we look at it all through the perspective of cybersecurity, right? Given the nature of the blockchain and the types of transactions that we're doing, it's different from traditional cybersecurity, and where traditional cybersecurity, the data represents the value. So if you lose your credit card number, you can always call the bank or the credit card issuing company and get it canceled. You can get chargebacks and so on. In the blockchain, the data is the value, right? Once you lose that data, you've lost that value, and there's no chargebacks. There's nobody that can come and help you and save the day. So this then again comes back to that core sort of issue of how do we separate the rights to use the private keys from the responsibility of keeping them secure. The folks that have the authority to transact with institutional assets, and we really focus on helping institutions build up their blockchain operations, is, well, let's give the authority to the right people. That's the finance teams, the executive, the legal team. But these folks don't know how to keep the stuff secure. They don't really often know what a private key is. At the same time, you want to be able to build up your operations, on your IT infrastructure, your engineering, your cybersecurity teams. You need to give them the responsibility and the role of actually building up this infrastructure without, having the possibility of potentially using that privilege to, gain illicit access to the company's funds, right? And it's a little known fact: 30% of successful cybersecurity incidents are actually perpetrated by trusted insiders. So we start with that perspective, and then we say, okay, well, these institutions that are trying to build up their businesses, whether they're exchanges or they're custodians or they're banks or they're marketplaces like NFT marketplaces and so on, what are the types of issues that they're going to face? And well, frankly, they tell us, right? The first thing is, well, how do I manage my private key security? Okay, we do that. The second is, how do I manage hundreds of thousands of users interacting with my platform? If I'm a centralized exchange, I need to know when my customers, I've got 1 million customers, when are they depositing funds into my infrastructure on chain? How much is that? And I need to be able to credit them instantly so that they can start trading. I need to also process withdrawals on a 24/7 basis, right? Tens of thousands of withdrawals daily. You cannot do that on a manual basis. So you need some kind of automation infrastructure to facilitate that. But as soon as you start introducing automation on the blockchain, as I said, it's a big security problem. So how do you build defense in depth? How do you build infrastructure that's going to allow you to automate, but also keep it secure? Then you deal with issues like, okay, well, again, in the context of an exchange, today everybody wants to trade Ethereum, tomorrow it's Solana, the next day it's AVAX, and so on. So I need to build the infrastructure that's going to support that, right? And that's an engineering cost. There's overhead associated with that. I can't just keep hiring more and more and more engineers, indefinitely as the demand sort of changes in terms of what folks are interested in. Then you also need to make sure that whatever trades are happening on your system or inbound and outbound, that it's actually going to be compliant. You don't want to be accepting funds from sanctioned addresses where the SEC comes and says we've got to shut down your operations for 6 months because we want to do an audit. So how do you keep ahead of that? And so we integrate solutions and work to provide all of these types of solutions bundled in one, so that our customers they really have a sort of a one-stop shop. And again, talking about sort of the cloud infrastructure that we in the Web3 in the Web2 context, it's AWS or GCP and so on. What can you do? How do we help you really effectively scale up your operations by providing all of these infrastructures for you?
Got it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. You guys obviously have different yet complementary perspectives to all this infrastructure that is required to building on Web3. People talk about Web3 development and infrastructure being hard. Is that right? How do you guys see that? Is it hard for whether some of you guys deal obviously with more Web3 native kind of clients and developers, right? And maybe Saibavo deals with folks that are perhaps coming from Web2 and other types of backgrounds. Is it really hard? And if it is hard, why is it hard? And what kind of trajectory do you guys see for making sure that Web3 development is as easy as developing a simple web app today?
Yeah. I do think Web3 development can be pretty challenging. I think some of that is a function of the fact that we are just newer to the space, and you have less tooling, you have less standards, you have less kind of off-the-shelf infrastructure that you can use in the way that you can in Web 2. I think what also complicates Web 2 development, or sorry, Web 3 development, depending on what you're building, is of course there come with, we're talking about kind of a hyper-financialized state of building where the risks that you're playing with are pretty significant in many of these cases, which also further increases the bar and further increases the complexity and kind of just the thoughtfulness that one has to employ just purely on a risk and security level. So I think for probably these two reasons, among others, there are lots of challenges. I think we increasingly are going to move to a place where you have more and more capable off-the-shelf technology where anyone can kind of come and more quickly spin up their, for instance, if they're building out a marketplace, that there are marketplace contracts that they can just take off the shelf, that there are, that they can take infrastructure provided by even a company such as ours where they can just take and like have direct integration with fiat rail so that they could have the ability to spin up custody where they don't have to think about these things, where they don't have to build out their own meta-transaction support for supporting gasless transactions. These are the things that, as of now, you very likely have to build a large portion of this yourself and have to internalize a lot of that complexity yourself as opposed to just relying on off-the-shelf and maybe like best practice, what will become, I think, increasingly best practice tools. So I do think it will become simpler. There are some unique difficulties with Web3 development, but again, hopefully we will tend towards a direction of making things more easy.
Yeah, I think first, I think you make some pretty important points. The first one is the risk on payment, essentially, or the fact that at the end of the day, you're actually touching a thing that touches people's money, which is terrifying in a lot of ways. Maybe that's an understatement even. To your point, I think that there's an additional thing. We look at it at the lens of dynamic, which is we call it the reverse Plaid problem, which is if you're a company like Plaid, right, you're integrating dozens of banks, but these are very slow-moving banks, and you have to deal with this really old technology. When you're integrating hundreds of wallets, you're integrating hundreds of startups that move extremely quickly and make daily changes. And so that's just in the wallet space. It's the same with the L1s that are there, the L2s that are there, the identity folks, the communication folks. These are hundreds of startups that are incredible and move extremely quickly. And so it's hard just because there's no stability in terms of the technology that you have to integrate with tomorrow is not what you have to integrate today. And so the complexity is a little bit, just because of the sheer excitement about the space and the sheer number of really cool things that are being built, essentially means that you don't know what wins tomorrow, and you have to support things that are ever changing, right? And you have to support things that literally launch every day and break themselves every day. And so, again, from our lens of dynamic, that means that you wake up in the morning and a wallet has changed how they think about, a smart wallet has changed how they think about kind of signatures, right? It can mean how new wallets launching across multiple chains and they act differently across multiple chains. It's just that speed of innovation creates, at the infrastructure layer, creates this massive developer challenge that it will be with us for a while. It's one of the most exciting, it's one of the funnest parts of crypto, but one of the most terrifying and complex parts of crypto as well.
Ahmad, what are your thoughts about those challenges?
I think the biggest thing today is the lack of education. And so we have a lot of developers out there that want to get into Web3, but they're too afraid to. And a lot of times it's because they don't have that source of truth that they can follow to be able to build the product that they're trying to build. I remember having a conversation with one of the major cloud providers, and their head of engineering said to me that we just figured out Ethereum, and now we have Solana, and we have Polygon, and we have so-and-so, Cosmos, all these new blockchains coming out. And they're like, we just can't keep up with it. And right then, it kind of hit me, and I realized that most engineers are not used to thumbing through Discord to find out how to do X, Y, Z on whatever protocol or whatever it is.
Right.
So I think we as an industry have to do better in terms of documentation, in terms of education. At Syndica, we try to do at least one Twitter space every month, where we talk to another project that is in the Solana ecosystem, and we ask them questions that would help other developers understand how that product works and how they can interact with the different primitives of that protocol. So I think just educating the developers is such a huge, I think, ordeal that we have to do better as an industry. Documentation, setting standards, some specifications. I think we can learn a lot from Web 1.0 actually, which if you look at how the different protocols that run our web today, which is HTTP and TLS and all these things, how they worked, it was just everybody kind of agreeing on a set of standards that, hey, this is how this should function, and everybody adopting those standards. So I think the more we start to standardize Web3 and the different layers of it, I think that's what's gonna allow Web3 development to be a lot easier. But I wholeheartedly agree with both these guys here. Like, I think those are really important pieces as well. But yeah, I would say let's not forget about the education piece of it.
I think you guys, both you and Itai, mentioned an important point. I would love to double click on that, which is we're living an increasingly fragmented world when it comes to crypto and blockchain, right? And most of it is for good reasons. I mean, we see more and more next generation layer 1s being launched, layer 2 solutions, scaling solutions. But I can only imagine how challenging it might be for companies like yourselves, as you guys mentioned. You have to keep up with all these, with all the fragmentation, right? With all the exploration and the developer interest that exists in all those ecosystems and solutions. How do you guys approach that from your strategy and the vision that you have? Do you take a ecosystem agnostic approach, or do you try to focus on one specific ecosystem to begin with? Jordan, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I think that particular problem is a bit easier for us because we're very much customer driven in terms of what do they want from us, right? And so we build in order to satisfy their needs and their requirements. And it can be challenging because we're trying to expand the market, ourselves in terms of getting everybody to use us. But as we see, different blockchains are good for different things. So when you try to cover everything, it can be tough to get that done. So we're very much customer driven in that respect. But I do want to just touch on one other point of the previous question in terms of what makes it hard. There's the additional complexity of that. Essentially where blockchain is today, certainly everything is financialized, right? So it doesn't matter, you're talking about building really cool NFT solutions for the GameFi industry. And that happened only over the last 6 months of 2021, right? Almost overnight, you had this entire financial ecosystem being built within the gaming industry, where NFTs were being bought and sold and loaned out for yield, and that really happened overnight. So there's this financial literacy that you also have to have as a developer in order to really sort of figure this out, and how do I really make a good value proposition. But then on top of that, because it's financial, there's also the regulatory component, which you kind of need to understand, and that can be incredibly intimidating, for developers. And then to compound that, there's really just not a lot of regulatory clarity, right? Which is something we're all pushing for and all hoping for. But I think that just makes it even more intimidating. So, look, we have very good signals from the governments around the world that they do want to regulate this, and they're trying to work as fast as possible. So I don't think it'll be a roadblock for much longer. But I think we are going to see that is also going to impact in terms of who are the winners and losers, in terms of protocols, in terms of solutions like stablecoins and so on. And so I think that'll provide us more guidance in the future as well.
Absolutely, that's a good point. Ahmad, you guys focus on the Solana ecosystem as you described, but tell us about your strategy and vision over time. Did you pick Solana to begin with? Are you guys going to optimize for that ecosystem? Do you plan to expand over time?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I think multi-chain is the future. We all agree, I think, on that. The reason why we picked Solana specifically to start off with was, I think building infrastructure for the most scalable chain and then bringing in less scalable chains is a lot easier as opposed to doing the inverse. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure providers that started out in like 2015, 2016 in the EVM space now having to go back and re-architect everything because the infrastructure they built just cannot handle the scale of 4,000 or 5,000 TPS, and that's just going to only increase. And so we definitely believe in a multi-chain world. We don't know exactly what's the next chain that we're going to tackle. One thing I will say is that we have when we were pitching to investors initially, they used to ask us like, why Solana, and what has Syndica done that's unique compared to others? And I used to always tell them that the real core technology that we've built is really scalable JSON RPC infrastructure. And if you guys don't know what JSON RPC is the specification that allows you to read or write data to the blockchain. And almost every blockchain uses JSON RPC to communicate with the clients, essentially. And so that's how we've kind of abstracted away the infrastructure piece. We kind of took a step back and realized that, okay, what is the actual communication layer that sits between the blockchain itself and the applications, and it's really just JSON RPC. So we've kind of built really scalable JSON RPC. For us to go live on another chain, in terms of just being able to plug and play the RPC infrastructure, is probably a couple weeks. So it's really easy for us to go live on another chain, but we're choosing to stay focused on Solana for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Itai? You guys take this focus more on the authentication, authorization, the onboarding side of things, but you also quote unquote suffer, I would imagine, from fragmentation of wallets and solutions and chains. How do you guys think about that into the future?
Yeah, I think first, if you fast forward 5 years, right, I don't think we'll be talking about chains anymore, right? But I think they will all exist. So by definition, as an abstraction layer, we have to support pretty much everything, right? Because you will have use cases where you need Solana, right? And you might have use cases where you need an Aptos or a suite, right? And there might be other use cases, or an Algorand, or anything of that sort. And so we need to build on top of all of them, but we need to create that abstraction layer for everyone else. The problem is, to your point, is predicting the future is pretty hard, right? And I'm usually wrong. And that's a problem.
Most of us are.
Most of us are, fair enough. Otherwise, I would have a completely different career.
Right.
But I think the cool thing about blockchain, though, is that pretty much all information is public, which it means that you can make very data-driven decisions in how you prioritize things. You don't have to just go based on hype. You can actually look at the data and see how a smart contract is being used, how an L1 is being used, how an L2 is being used, and so on. And we kind of ruthlessly prioritize based on that. We have a strategy around, we go way beyond authentication, right? We go into authorization. We go into kind of, data, data and identity, right? And so we literally just sit there and look at, okay, these smart contracts, how often are they being used? Should we prioritize, is there kind of a growth around them? Should we prioritize them now? Right? And these new chains, should we prioritize them now? Based on that, we kind of tackle prioritization. But kind of if you fast forward 5 years, we're gonna have pretty much everything, because I do think it's not a market with a winner take all. I don't think there's one chain to rule them all. I think there's some interesting ecosystems around EVM, around the Move chains, the Cosmos chains, and so on. And so we'll just need to support everything and create that abstraction layer on top.
Timur, how do you guys think about different ecosystems?
I think I would piggyback off of a lot of what Itai raised, is that we do sit as an abstraction layer, and so with that we have to, and I share the sentiment that we're firmly in a multi-chain world. I think we'll probably have some eventual consolidation around chains a little bit, but that will still be in a multi-chain world pretty firmly, and that it's the role of infrastructure providers, of those who are trying to simplify experiences, whether it's for developers or whether it's for their end users, that we have to internalize that complexity. So we have to support all of them. So inevitably, with time, we will be, right now we are focused on EVM chains, but we'll be everywhere with time. But in terms of how we go about prioritization, it is pretty similar. It's where we just think about where the growth is and where the need is most pressing. But with time, we do expect to be everywhere and expect to be kind of internalizing that complexity such that our users and applications don't have to be thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. One topic that I think is pretty important when it comes to Web3 infrastructure, and I think you guys all in one way or the other mentioned it, is security, right? I think, Jordan, for you guys, it's particularly part of your DNA, as you mentioned. What do you guys, how do you guys approach security, particularly when you're dealing with clients or developers that might not be as sophisticated in Web3. And I know you deal with those types of situations more or less. I know you guys focus a lot on kind of more Web3 native developers, right? But how big of a deal is security, and how do you approach that challenge with your customers?
You want to, I can take
Yeah,
that first.
go on.
I mean, I think we've talked about the fact that we are operating in a hyper financialized environment where if you, and the result of that is if you mess up, bad things happen. If you are touching anything related to custody, if you're touching anything related to the kind of the movement of money, of course we've seen all the bridge hacks, you have to be very, very careful. So we just I'd say generally just try and employ best security practices. It's, as you were mentioning, Jordan, a large number of these security incidents are not a result of some poor infrastructural decision or some vulnerability on a technical side, but it's some social engineering or something like that as well. So I think people, there are objectively like uniquely complicated aspects in regards to security of Web3, but there's also just basic operational security that I think has to be employed and that maybe isn't employed nearly to the extent that it should in the space. So at Slide, we take this very seriously. And so this is something we think about a lot, but I think this sounds a little trite, but I truly suggest the basics in terms of thinking about security, in terms of just generally investing in operational security, making sure you know that the people who are actually writing anything that's going to touch contracts that move money have been in the space for a long time. There are a lot of Solidity developers that kind of appeared in the last couple months and who just kind of picked it up, and those are probably not the people that you want to have writing your contracts that are going to be holding any significant number of assets. Yeah, I mean, this is a little bit of a non-answer, but I do think that a common sense does go a long way in security with Web3. Of course, auditing, all this stuff. I mean, I could go down the list, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah, same. To your point, I think, look, the common sense approaches kind of win here, which is, I mean, Web3 should innovate on a lot of things. Innovating on security should probably not be one of them. You gotta kind of make sure that you have best practices that have been developed for years. I think it means, we think about it two ways. First, all authentication companies are inherently security companies. I sell the fact that you don't have to deal with this stuff, and I do. And so it means moving slower a little bit, right? It means the fact that we don't launch a new thing every week. And it means that we are a little bit more thoughtful about the speed in which we iterate, and the speed and how we think about kind of backwards compatibility and things of that sort. I think the second thing that we have to deal with, and I bet you probably have to do the same, which is kind of the UI aspect. And security is not just kind of having security, but communicating how things work to end consumers, right? What does it mean when you're signing something? What do all these things mean? And kind of, we have this responsibility to educate end consumers who are kind of, interacting with the wallet for the first time, or buying an NFT for the first time, or anything of that sort, and explaining and kind of leaving them not just with a single interaction, but a slightly better understanding from where they came in for how to interact with Web3, right? And so education, I think, is an important part for how we not just do security at our level, but how do we make sure folks think about security. Same, by the way, as Web2 and folks knowing not to touch phishing emails anymore, right? Because it's been ingrained into us for the last 15 years of security training within companies. We now need to start thinking about the same thing with how folks interact with wallets and what do you click and what do you not click. I think it's on us. I think it's on wallets to better communicate the UI. I think there are some interesting startups that are coming up to help with that as well. But short answer is a combination of kind of the basic, getting the basics right, and moving a little bit slower, and more on the UI side and kind of educating end users about it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's really complicated. There's no right answer, I think, right now when it comes to security and in terms of smart contracts and protocols. A lot of it's going to be trial and error, unfortunately. But the fortunate reality of crypto is that the rate at which it iterates is a lot faster than Web 2. And that's primarily because you have the whole world, right, battle testing your smart contract. It's out there in the open. Anybody can download your smart contract and play around with it and do whatever they want. And so I think as we iterate over time and we learn from these mistakes, the developers will get better, and there'll be certain standards that are set in place to prevent some of these bigger hacks that occur. I also think that there's still a lot of work to be done in the actual auditing space. So I think there's a lot of ways you can automate the auditing of smart contracts, and certain technologies can be built in that space as well. So, but yeah, the gist of it is that it's really complicated right now. But yeah, hopefully we get into a better state quickly.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with everything the gentlemen have all said here. I think there's sort of three different ways to look at it, or just three fundamental aspects. Everything that is consumer facing, you need to abstract security away to not let the consumers make any kind of decisions. And this is what Itai is doing with his solutions, right? You have to understand that 90% of cybersecurity incidents are the result of user error. It's just folks are not familiar with this technology. They're going to make mistakes. So that's the first thing. And then we still have major hurdles to overcome. Like, I mean, why are we still using passphrases, mnemonic passphrases that you have to write down somewhere? And that's a security 101 no, right? So there are things that we can do on the consumer level, but really it's just abstracting as much of the security issue away from them as possible. On the institutional level, it's about really, performing due diligence and operational security, as Taimur mentioned. Everything has to be following very, very well established, operational procedures and best practices that are there from the Web 2 era, right? We already know how to do much of this stuff. I think the third area where we're facing a lot of challenges, a lot of issues, again, we shouldn't be. We know how to deal with all of this stuff. If we look at things like re-entrancy attacks, right, that have happened over and over again, it's the same issue. We were dealing with this in PHP. PHP includes. We're creating essentially the same problem from a logical perspective 15 years ago, right? And we were writing, static source code analysis solutions to help you sort of identify this, before you actually deploy. So we have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of best practices in traditional Web 2 security that should be adopted at the smart contract level if we're talking about DeFi and things like that. I think why it hasn't is that a lot of the folks that are developing DeFi applications are coming into this world from traditional finance, and they didn't learn those lessons from Web 2. Right, they're new developers. They're new to this. Right, they're leveraging their traditional finance knowledge in trying to roll out products on Web 3 without having gone through the gauntlet of building Web 2 applications. Which is why we actually need more Web 2 developers to come into Web 3, right, and to make it sort of a more mature industry. So yeah, I think at those three levels, this is really where we can focus. What we do at Cybarvo is that sort of operationalization of security at the institutional level, right? So we roll out all the tools to help you actually get it done.
So that's kind of sorry, go ahead.
Can I just add one thing? So I think you mentioned an important point, which is essentially I think one key advantage that crypto has is we have this incredible alignment of incentives to get security right.
Right.
Because every $100 million hack is this incentive for 10 startups to pretty much solve it. And so I think it's a problem that we have because it's a new space, but the speed in which we're going to get this right is going to be extremely fast, just because the incentives of kind of all this stuff touches money are so much bigger than what we have across some other industries. I think it's a problem that as long as there are hacks, there's going to be startups that every hack is essentially 10 startups spinning up.
Yep.
That's really, so that's one more thing to add, I think, to your point.
But we could also do better in terms of setting up standards bodies like we had in Web 2.0. We had OWASP, right? Open Web Application Security Project, which we release, every year, the 10 biggest issues that web applications are suffering from. How do you identify them? How do you address them? How do you fix them and deal with them, right? There should be a lot more communication.
Let's go into that, and I think given the time, maybe that'll be our final question, but that's a perfect segue, I think, for us to wrap up. How do we onboard those Web 2 developers, as you mentioned? Is that the focus of part of what you guys do? If you can share quickly, what are the things that we can do to onboard more developers and go through this phase and accelerate this sophistication of our phase that we're in more quickly?
So I'll start. I mean, what we're trying to do is just, I think provide a lot more transparency in terms of what we do, but also how to interface and interact with our infrastructure, right? So at some level, we're also trying to abstract away a lot of the security issues, a lot of the problems, a lot of the compliance problems and issues that developers are facing, right? So here's just a suite of APIs that you can use to effectively get the things done. So that's going to be sort of the easier sort of entry point for Web2 developers to work in a familiar environment and really not have to deal with a lot of the difficulty and the complexity of working in Web3. Of course, you know, success breeds success. If you get that right, then those developers and engineers, to Itai's point, will start to want to develop, you know, other solutions that maybe identify or address other problems and issues that they've identified while working on that. So, you know, I think everybody on this stage is working to some level to sort of abstract a lot of these problems out,
yep,
so that we can put Web2 developers in a more comfortable, familiar environment that can help them succeed.
Right.
Yeah.
Ahmad, your closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would say that I think bug bounties goes a long way. We need more white hackers, right, that are actually coming in and testing out these protocols, making sure that they're secure. I think the best way is kind of just making sure the incentives exist for people to report these issues and have some kind of a meaningful payout. You know, the saying, money makes the world go round. I think that's very much true in crypto as well, and that's what's going to push us forward to make sure that these protocols are secure.
Itai, how do we onboard the next hundreds of thousands of Web2 developers?
Yeah, I think for the vast majority of developers, I think they don't need to know about the intricacies of some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the short. When there's a new AWS service, right? You don't necessarily have to know the entire history of the protocol or the kind of the infrastructure that's built upon. It's just a tool for you to use, and it looks like any other tool within AWS, and it's pretty straightforward to implement. The same goes for any dev tool within Web3, which is, for us, we try to look as Web2 as possible for developers. That means that we return JOTs, and we return, and we have toggles to turn on features, and we have kind of very standardized APIs. Again, it comes back to there are places where we're trying to innovate, and there are places where we definitely should not. Developer experience should not be on the list of places to innovate. Again, the Stripes of the world and the Plaids of the world have done a phenomenal job in how you do that correctly. I think replicating that and making sure that some of this new stuff that essentially some of whatever new protocol, excuse me, comes in looks and feels as easy for someone to implement as they do kind of a Stripe checkout page, or they do anything of that sort, or they use an auth0, or that's kind of how you bring, in my opinion, the next 100,000 developers, is by not making it hard for them to start. Mm-hmm. I think you guys do a great job of that, right? Like, it's essentially that abstraction layer is critical.
Right. Tamer, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I largely can just echo what was said. I think that to bring in, it's not dissimilar to the question of how do you bring in more users on the end user front, is you simplify things. You standardize things, you simplify things, you provide more education, and you basically make it easier for people to come on. Right now, just as it is on the end user front, it's also pretty challenging on the developer front. And so I think by having world-class developer experiences, by having exceptional education, by having and by I guess, like, increasingly, as I keep on mentioning, I think having tools that are off the shelf that are really, really easy to use, where anyone can just kind of plug and play and get started. I think these will all contribute to making it that much easier for the developers to go to join. I think you have, just like in any market, you have the early adopters. The developers have already kind of gone through and figured this stuff out and waded through the complexity of having to get set up with Web3, but then you have this very large group of developers who are probably interested and who would be willing, but who aren't yet here for some of the aforementioned reasons. So, yeah.
Right. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. I think if we are to onboard the next billion users, as people talk about, into financial services and general purpose apps built on this kind of infrastructure, we certainly need to onboard the next set of developers first, and thank you guys for taking that good fight and improving on that infrastructure and developer experience.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.